Good evening, and thank you so much for joining me for this final session of our class, Awesome Perspectives on Death and Dying. Bittersweet moment. I don't say this is the end of this conversation. Like I said, I see it as a beginning, as a departure point for further conversation, collaboration. How can we take this work further and beyond the Zoom room and maybe bring it also to different audiences and invite you to share your ideas because this is a topic that concerns all of us. And I feel extremely uh, privileged to have the opportunity to be given this space and this platform to process out loud some of my deepest feelings and thinkings, and I'm acutely aware that so many people don't have that opportunity, so it's really um close to my heart. That's why I think I keep talking about this topic and trying to share, because I would love for people to be able to have a departure point and to have a space they can take as a beginning for their own thinking, and maybe able to share their own grief and their own pain, and hopefully also be a voice for those who don't have a voice or are not seen in their grief. And because it's such a taboo topic to talk about death, and we don't always know how to address it. And I think realizing that we are all learning together and going together. And so I'm really passionate about thinking how how this course and how this content can have an afterlife. How can we bring it to different audiences so people have a space, a beginning, a platform where they can share their reflections and take this as a conversation um, partner, take me as a conversation partner, and examine their own views, like I said in the beginning. So I feel extremely privileged, and I feel extremely blessed. They have this incredible opportunity to work with amazing colleagues at an institution that has given me the space to think out loud about one of the most existential topics. Um, and I also see so much potential. One of the things that I discovered is, yes, there is so much pain and tragedy involved with the death experience, but it also leads to the most profound and deepest connections you can have with another human being. And that is something that I deeply treasure. And I hope you are also able to see that, because while we are all on our own journey and we are all uniquely beautiful and as individuals, there is still so much that connects us. Some of our, like I said, all these human experiences are so similar, even though they might differ in their details, but grief is a shared universal experience. And so there's potential to connect interreligiously, to connect beyond labels, beyond constructed categories. And those are the themes that are deeply to my heart. So I invite you to share your thoughts, your questions, your feedback. I'm hoping and planning to expand this into a book version, and hopefully so that people can use it as a resource. But I also would love to hear from others. What would be helpful to them? What would be useful in their own contexts, in their own lives, in their own professional work? They might be serving in a healthcare setting, in a hospice setting. Also just like as regular human beings who live in the same neighborhood. What are some ideas that you might have? And so at the end of this class, when my colleagues will send out the survey, I invite you to share your reflections, your input. I really need your help and support to carry this work beyond this audience, and hope to be able to build those bridges with others, and more understanding around this topic. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So tonight, last time we didn't have enough time for our small group conversation, so I hope we will catch up on that, and we will have time for some group reflection, some small groups, and also wanted to look at our particular context tonight, the American context, and how American Muslims approach, the topic of death and dying. What are some practical things that need to be kept in mind? So just a little bit around that. Also completely acknowledge that I'm barely scratching the surface. There's so much. I have this good problem that there's a lot that I want to talk about and convey, but I realize I have, under this limited scope of time, it's very difficult. So I'm really condensing most of it. So that's our program for tonight. We will be going back, reviewing the session from last time on how to cultivate healthy death awareness and looking at the prophetic model. Like I said, Prophet Muhammad had a very, very long, very traumatic experience with death and dying. These were very tragic experiences in his life. And so for Muslims, looking at the prophetic model is so important, because Prophet Muhammad as a human role model is seen in the Islamic tradition as a second source of authority for Muslim life. Muslims orient themselves around the prophetic model, around the prophetic example. So we need to take those sources seriously, especially the Hadith tradition. Those written reports, these codified collections are so important in Muslim life and for Muslim practice. And so when Muslims are thinking about grieving, about how to approach death, how to feel about death, how to cultivate thinking around death, Prophet Muhammad is that sacred source of guidance, of illumination, of wisdom. And then I want to invite you to take that prophetic paradigm into your own thinking and examine how does this look with our current culture? How are we, approaching this model? Is this something that we can appreciate? Is this something that resonates? And then also, like I said, taking this prophetic model as a starting point for our own reflection and looking at our own context. And like I said, we will go into small groups for that, and then we will also come back and look at some of the examples that are happening here in the local neighborhood. Today, I attended a funeral service, and I wanted to share a couple of things with you about that. It's a good case study for us, but also just happened to be today. Yesterday, a dear sister in faith in our community, beloved member in our community, she passed away, and today was her funeral. So like you've seen in the readings, funerals happen very fast, and there's a reason for this, of course, because the tradition emphasizes that the souls need to, they desire and yearn to be reunited with the source, with the absolute source of love, which who for Muslims is the compassionate creator, that the soul yearns to go home. And so delay burials is reprehensible in the Islamic tradition. And it's quite fascinating how fast everything evolves. And that sometimes puzzles non-Muslims because, sometimes those things are delayed because the death certificate has to be processed and all of that. So this is something that is very important for Muslims to be able to have these bureaucratic processes be, somehow, to not delay this whole process, but to be able to quickly arrange for the funeral services. the Zoom environment is a wonderful option to reach so many people across the nation, but I also miss the human interaction, the really face-to-face encounter, and we are about that too. So I wanted to extend this invitation for those who are local and those who are free to come and meet me next week on Wednesday at our ICJS library. Me and some of my colleagues will be there hosting you. I called it office hours. You know, a professor has office hours. So the class concludes, and if you have any lingering questions, or if you just wanted to connect, right? This is, I think, something that I'm passionate about is that human interaction, that face-to-face encounter, to sit together in a circle and be able to share our feelings, our thoughts. I would deeply appreciate that. I would welcome that. I know it's not possible for everyone. It's during the day, people work, you have obligations, but if that's possible for you, if you are willing, if you are interested, that is just something that I wanted to put out, and an invitation to meet some people in my community and hear from them and what they were feeling throughout this course. It will be wonderful to meet you. So I hope I see many of you. So that's for next week, Wednesday, May 23. I will be in the office, in the building, and my colleagues as well. And I'm looking forward to see some of you. So let me go back to the Sunnah. Like I said in last week, the Sunnah for Muslims are the teachings and the life of the Prophet Muhammad, a holistic lifestyle. And I would say it's the art of living. For Muslims, when they look at the Prophet Muhammad, is the fundamental question, how can I be a good human being in this world? With all these difficult experiences, how can I bring my full self to God? How do I live a God-pleasing life in all of my experiences? And that includes also grieving. That includes relating and engaging with the reality of death and dying. So the fundamental question is, how do I do and feel and think in a way that makes me bring closer to God's love? That's the fundamental question. And for Muslims, it is through that model of the Prophet Muhammad. And like I said, his sayings and actions and silent approvals are all codified in these hadith collections. And just to remind ourselves, hadith means report or narration. And tonight we'll be looking at some of these reports which have normative weight. So death and dying in the life of Prophet Muhammad was not an alien experience for him. Like I said last week, he didn't live a comfortable life. It was not a life of convenience. It was a life, 63 years of trials, tribulations, hardship, trauma, rejection, being ridiculed and treated like an outcast. He was somebody who encountered death often throughout his childhood, his adult life, and his community also suffered. There were the early years, 13 years, 10 years, I think 10 or 13 years in Mecca were the years of persecution. It was very painful, traumatic time. And those are very vivid. Those experiences of trauma and loss and hardship are very vivid in the collective memory of Muslims, especially in times of adversity and anguish. They look up to the Prophet Muhammad, who shows them how to conduct themselves in times of pain and suffering and injustice. And this is not to say that it's not the idea that suffering needs to be embraced. In fact, the tradition over and over, we looked at some of these narrations, says we should never, glorify a death or suffering or injustice or evil. This is something that is absolutely, should be shunned by at all costs. But life and the nature of this life includes that also traumatic experiences are part of the human journey. And so in all of these difficult chapters of the human experience, Prophet Muhammad shows the way for Muslims. So that kind of model of the grieving prophet is extremely important for Muslims. So I collected a few hadiths, holy narrations by the prophet that have significant weight for Muslims, especially in times of loss. And what you always recognize in these narrations is there is no reason why this person died. I mean, you don't hear any explanation given why God has taken that loved one, or why God has taken the soul, or why God has allowed the suffering. There's no explanation. The thing that really comes out through the narrations is that your loved ones are safe, that suffering and evil is something that is so painful that it needs to be rectified in the hereafter. So I wanted you to look at some of these narrations. So this first one says, the messenger of God said, there are 7 martyrs besides one who is killed in the way of God. And I know, the whole concept of martyrdom is a very controversial one, but in the Islamic tradition, martyrdom is the highest, the highest thing that somebody can do for God. Martyrdom means to give yourself fully on the path of God, that kind of complete devotion. And we shouldn't think here about martyrdom, about these modern phenomena, about Islamic extremism. That's not what is meant here. What is meant here about martyrdom is somebody who is fighting. And just to be honest and frank here, that in the early years of the Islamic expansion, military warfare was a reality, right? So Islam expanded militarily into different areas. However, there was always a code of conduct, an ethical and moral code of conduct that needed to be followed. So in any historical account, you don't see people going and massacre. Historically, not. That is just untrue. But what I wanted to highlight here is that martyrdom is not just simply something that is done when you are in a situation of military expansion. But here, what is interesting in this hadith, in this narration, it says, and especially in the pandemic, this was something that was cited often, the victim of plague is a martyr. The victim of plague, you can think of a pandemic, for example, because a plague is something, and there are more narrations around that. The victim of plague is a martyr. The one who drowns is a martyr. The one who dies of chest pain is a martyr. The one who dies of stomach infection is a martyr. The one who burns to death is a martyr, very painful death. So these are all very painful deaths, because it's this acknowledgement that these are not natural death, not somebody who, coming to age is dying, but very painful, very traumatic experiences of death. The one who dies under the rubble is a martyr, and the pregnant woman who dies in labor is a martyr. Now, what this signifies in this hadith is that some of the deaths are so painful, and there is no compensation of that in this world, because this person, as a person of faith, died in such unnatural ways, and it's so traumatic that then becomes of such a high degree in the hereafter. And being a martyr is the highest stage in the afterlife. Now, why I'm sharing this narration is to just show you that for Muslims, this is a very comforting narration. I mean, that somebody who dies of these very unnatural causes in such traumatic manner, that is completely horrific, right? And they are granted the high rank in the hereafter for as a martyr, seen as martyrdom. A pregnant woman who dies in labor is a martyr because she has given herself fully for another person and completely, given herself fully to protect the life, or give existence to the life of another human being. So those narrations have heavy weight in Muslim life. It's also an element to comfort the person that they will be compensated in the hereafter, because the pain is just too great. The death is just so traumatic that this cannot stand. this is just completely evil and unjust, and there needs to be some restoration. And those, holy prophetic narrations has given comfort, especially to the grieving, because they realize, but there's no explanation why this person died this way, right? Why God has allowed that to happen. But what's important is that the reward, the heavenly reward, the heavenly rank, that heavenly life that person will have will be one of, the many rewards of a martyr. Now, the other thing here, the prophet said, by the one in whose hand is my soul, the miscarried fetus will carry his mother by his umbilical cord into paradise if she was seeking its reward. Like here again, it's very interesting. The miscarried fetus, there is so much in the tradition that talks about stillbirth and miscarriage. It's phenomenal. It's something that is not talked about, especially this is 7th century Arabia, right? I mean, this is a society that is involved in, pre-Islamic times, in physical force, in violence, and tribal warfare. And then this person comes and talks about miscarriage and stillbirth. And what is also interesting here, that this miscarried fetus, this baby, has agency. It will decide about the fate of its mother in the afterlife. It will pull her mother into paradise. I mean, it's a very interesting hadith that is well known in the Muslim community, and honestly gives comfort, consolation to many mothers and parents, because miscarriage and stillbirth is such a dismissed, disenfranchised type of grief, because that the fetus has not even is not even in bodily shape or form. I mean, outside the mother's womb. So it's a very interesting, but it gives agency to the baby, that then it will carry the parents, the mother especially, by its umbilical cord into paradise, and that the mother is given the heavenly reward for her pain and her suffering in this world, because this is something that is so traumatic. And in another narration, and there are many, especially about child death or child loss, God's messenger said, yes, their children are the little ones of paradise, and one of them will meet his father or his parents and take hold of his garment or his hand, as I'm taking hold of the edge of this garment of yours, and he will not let go until God admits him and his father to paradise. So again, the sense of agency of children, that they will decide and be key players in that heavenly reward is just something that captures beautifully the compensation for all that pain and the promise for that suffering, and for all these years in pain, and the yearning for their children, and the children awaiting their parents and not forgetting them. That's also very interesting. Usually, babies will not remember what happened in early infancy, or children in early infancy, right? But here the child remembers, the fetus remembers, and there is this divine promise that God makes through the prophet Muhammad to those bereaved parents. It's quite interesting. So why am I sharing this? Especially when in moments of intense grief, you go back to these kind of narrations, and they're comforting. They invite you to cultivate hope and endure, and cultivate that important virtue that we all hold high, patience, because that is something that is very hard to do when you are in intense acute pain and grief. Like I explained last week, how cultivating healthy death awareness is very stands at the core in the Islamic tradition. And you've seen that Prophet Muhammad has so many sayings, so many statements how to cultivate healthy death awareness, and that there is a push for this practice, meditative practice, that was actually also practice in medieval times, and even in non-Muslim communities, in the Christian tradition, what we call memento mori, remember you must die. That kind of reflection and meditation that centered people in their lives and intensified their quality of living. So this is not something particular to the Islamic tradition. It just happens in our modern time. That is not something that we actively pursue. But here, of course, in the Islamic tradition, that there is an encouragement to make sure that death awareness is cultivated. So I've listed some of these holy narrations for you, to remember death often. Like I said, this is not something that is very, typical in our modern society. You would be perceived as morbid or somehow life denying. Quite the contrary. Here it's about the life affirming element. Remember to cherish life every moment, because you will die, and make the most out of these precious, precious days. So that's basically the idea. And then the encouragement to visit graves often, to make that also an active, embodied practice, right? So Islam is very much about embodiment, like that you walk to a graveside, that you stand there, that you look, that you feel, that you, even sit there for a while, that you pray, that you, just also, cultivate that sense of, oh, this is my ultimate destiny. And am I prepared? Am I preparing? Like really actively embodied death awareness is very key. And then be in this world like a traveler or a stranger, this idea of cultivating healthy attachments to the world. That, again, doesn't mean to deny this world or be in this escapist mode or quietist attitude. Quite the contrary. I have only a very limited hour to live here, so I need to really focus on the most essential things, the most sacred task, and make a meaningful living. And also do not get overly, excessively obsessed, concerned about things that should not concern me, right? Trivial things, but be grounded and knowing that that ultimately, as a traveler, I will be departing. And a stranger is one who sees the world as an exhibit, like an art exhibit, trying to save the most beautiful images and meanings, and then leaving this world with a beautiful legacy. So that's what actually the middle way, right? So that we are focused on a life affirming attitude to really make the most of our limited time here on this earth. I shared this last week, so it's absolutely prohibited in the Islamic tradition to desire death, to wish for death due to a calamity or an adversity. And of course, sometimes you are so traumatized, you think, I can't do this anymore, right? Like this is just too hard, it's too heavy. But the idea is that this world comes with a whole package, that there will be moments of hardship, moments of tragedies, and that to embrace all of it, to be accepting, to lean into the discomfort, and leave the final decision to God. So that's why this prayer is so important here. Oh God, keep me alive so long as life is good for me, and cause me to die if death is better for me. So trusting God's ultimate judgment and his wisdom, and leaving those matters to his hand. If anybody needs to, ask for death, this is also a prophetic model to embody how to speak those words, to leave it in the compassionate care of God. And again, life of affirming statements, not to shun life or try to be persistent, and cultivate resilience, cultivate hope. And like I said last time, hope is a spiritual muscle. Hope is not something that comes easy. You need to work on it and cultivate a good sacred outlook, thinking, nourish your heart and mind, do active things. Those are things that cultivate that spiritual muscle. And so the life affirming statements here: the best of people is the one who lives long and does good. like somebody who lived a long life, but saw this life and all its resources and that sacred trust and all these talents and gifts that were given to him, all the skills and abilities as a sacred trust, and made use of them in the best way. So what I found interesting, when you look at that embodied prophetic model, that human model, you see that healthy death awareness is integrated into all these circles of life. And we are all connected to these circles. We are a self that is, contains by a heart, mind, body, and soul. When we say self, that's our sense of self. We are a being with a heart, an intellect, a body, and a soul. But then it's not just us. We have family, we live in neighborhoods, we work, we are involved at a workplace. Then we have the larger community and society, but we are also part of nature. Nature sustains us, nature nourishes us, nature strengthens us. And also nature depends on us. So it's all this interwoven, interconnected circle, these circles of connection. And what is interesting, you see that the prophetic model aims to have that kind of holistic approach. Death awareness needs to be established in all of these circles of life. If one is missing, then those circles of connection remain unstable, and everything can also fall apart. So the holistic approach to cultivating a healthy death awareness, which we will see in these statements, you see that the prophet had a very strong a sense of his own mortality. Like the moment he would go to bed and he woke up, when he would go to bed at night and then he woke up in the morning, he would say, "In your name we die and we live." It's a very important supplication that many Muslims say before they go to sleep, or are encouraged to say. And when he would wake up, he would say, realize that life is a gift. Life, I don't want to say a gift, but sacred trust, to keep it theologically sound. But it's God who has given us life. All praise is due to God who has given us life after our death, because sleep is seen as that little sibling of death. And unto him is the resurrection. And also important, like I highlighted last time, the collectivity of this experience. It's not just me who's going to die, or it's not just me who's going to grieve. We are all in this together. We are all on the same human journey. We will all experience grief, loss, pain, sadness, the whole package, the whole human experience. So there's always the emphasis on the we, which is so beautiful, and realizing the interconnectedness, the interwoven relationship with all these, sacred circles of connection. So it's a very strong, embodied, and understanding that I will die, and this day that has been given to me again by God is a sacred trust, and I'm going to make it count, and I'm going to make it meaningful. And I try to live a life without regrets and remorse, without hurting anyone, harming anyone, preserving their dignity and their rights, because all these circles are also connected to my own sense of self. And one other example is anytime the prophet would mount an animal, he would say this this very famous supplication. Now, many Muslims, who start the engine of their car, or who are on an airplane, even many airlines who fly to Muslim majority countries, will have this prayer. Like before the airplane takes off, you will hear this prayer which says, "Glory unto him who created this transportation for us, though we were unable to create it on our own, and unto our Lord we shall return." So the idea of return, always this idea of I will go back to that heavenly origin, my heavenly home, wherever I'm traveling, to him is the ultimate destination. And to keep that alive, that kind of healthy death awareness is very interesting. So very strong sense of his own self, his own fragility, his own mortality. So that is very strong and embodied. This is something that is those supplications are always repeated in his own sense of self. So, but the next circle of connection is the family. Like many of us who have family, he would make sure that he would show up in the family circle and also cultivate healthy death awareness there. So even after many years after his mother died, I mean, remember his mother died when he was 6 years old. He would still, as an adult man, would still go and visit the grave of his mother. And people are, observing him. They are recording what he says. This is a society that memorizes everything. And they would witness that he would weep. It's not crying, weeping. And sometimes we have very detailed accounts where some of his companions say he would weep so much, he would sob so much that his beard was so wet, right? And he moved others around him to tears. Like I said last week, this is very important, beautiful narrations that also show how to cultivate this idea of sacred masculinity, that to give yourself as an adult man the permission to cry in public. That is still something that is not very, very welcomed or embraced. You hear that often. A person of faith doesn't cry, or toughen up. Real men don't cry. It's seen as an expression of weakness or a weak faith when you cry in front of others, or something shameful or something embarrassing. But here, this is a very public document. All the male companions, all female companions are witnessing, and they are weeping with him. They join with him. They are moved, and they are not ashamed to sit with him in that pain and his grief. And that's also a beautiful thing, collectively, to make space for that pain and not to shun it. And there were some of his early followers and companions who would be puzzled about this, because this idea of strong manhood and chivalry or masculinity that didn't allow for grieving or weeping was still very strong. And you have him, say those things, that actually a soft and tender heart is an embodiment, it's a manifestation of God's mercy, that it's something beautiful. You are revealing something about God's quality, the merciful. And in his own family, even after his wife died, his wife Khadija, or his parents died, he would make sure that the friends and the loved ones of his wife and his parents were treated in the best way. So even honoring their legacy and honoring the relationships they had. And so we hear him say, the finest act of goodness is the kind treatment of a person to the loved ones of his father after his death. Like the way how their memory is kept alive, how those relationships are nurtured and kept alive, that he would make sure he would visit, the friends and the loved ones of his parents. It's very important, and it's also encouraged that children do that, and families honor their deceased loved ones in such a way. So, and then you now make the circle bigger. So family is definitely something that we have healthy awareness integrated. That was the second circle. Then we expand the circle. We are also community people. So in all of these circles, you see Islam regarding or perceiving the human being as a social creature. Fundamentally, being a relational being is important, a social being, and cultivating those healthy connections is very important if we talk about bereavement support, right? Now we keep those circles in mind, because bereavement support or grief support starts before tragedy hits. Very important principle in Islam is that everything is about prevention. You have to have healthy, stable connections in place. So when tragedy hits, that you have a network, a support network that allows you to grieve, that holds you in your pain. But oftentimes people don't have that. They when tragedy hits or something happens, they look around. Oh, I don't have those 2, 3 people I can call and say, please come and sit with me. I'll just feel so lonely. So Islam is really about prevention before things get really hard, to make sure that these healthy relationships are cultivated. Not because you need the person in your life tomorrow, that too, that's a beautiful side product, but fundamentally believing as a person of faith, I need to honor the social contract. God wants me to cultivate relationships with others because they are a creation of God, and God wants me to be in a relationship because this person has something to offer and I have something to offer. So that's very important when we think later about bereavement support. You can support somebody and knock on their door more easily when you have a relationship of trust. But if those relationships of trust and closeness are missing, then it's there's more of a hesitation and reservation to go to someone and say, I've heard you're going through a hard time, I want to be with you. So to make sure that those points of entries are already in place. In terms of that circle with community, Prophet Muhammad would say, so he would visit graveyards very often, and he would greet them with the greeting that he would extend to those who are alive in this world. He would say, Assalamu alaikum, O inhabitants of the graves, believers and Muslims, and we will join you soon if God wills. We ask God for well-being for us and for you. So he would talk to the inhabitants of the graves. He would greet them anytime he would pass the cemeteries. And remember, in traditional Muslim societies, cemeteries were often in the center of the city, just to facilitate easier and healthier death awareness. And the dead were part of life. People would pass them, would pray for them, would greet them with that very common greeting of peace be upon you. And so the idea that death and life are part of a whole, that those souls are still alive, is very much seen in these narrations. And then also a very, very interesting, stunning fact, the Prophet would wake up in the middle of the night and visited the graveyard to offer prayers for the inhabitants of the graves. And I would say, as a Muslim, I've never done that, but reading this, I found fascinating that he would wake up in the middle of the night to be with those who are the inhabitants of the graves, pray for them, never abandon them, remember them, honor their memories, and he would make time for that. That is a very, very interesting account and very powerful. I mean, if somebody would do that today, we would say there's something wrong with that person, right? Even Muslims, as Muslims, we don't see that often. But the idea that there is a reality beyond the grave, and that death is not the end, that it's a transition to that other dimension, and cultivating, the tradition wants to cultivate in their followers this idea to think two-dimensional. There is the worldly existence, but there is also the otherworldly existence. There is the world of the seen and the world of the unseen, which is still very real. And those prophetic words, they always convey that it's not all what you see. There is more to this world than the material side. And when the Prophet would receive death news, he would say the Quranic passage, indeed to God we belong, and indeed to him is our return. We will look at some of the local funeral announcements of the mosques in this neighborhood, who always quote this Quranic passage first in their announcements. The idea that to God belongs everything. I have no claim of ownership. Because remember, life is a sacred trust. The body is a sacred trust. Children are a sacred trust. Wealth is a sacred trust. Everything. I mean, the Quran talks about that people are deluded by the idea that it's their own. But when death hits, we are shockingly reminded, painfully reminded, I had no control about their end. I had no control, or didn't have any say about this decision. And so, this idea that God has the absolute moral and ethical right, the only one who has the only absolute ethical and moral right to take back what is his own. And so you don't find any other explanation in the tradition and why so and so died and what's the reason and what's the cause, because it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant in the grand scheme of, in this grand divine scheme. God created this person, God owned this person, and he decides when the person returns to them. I mean, it's a painful idea to let go, to understand that this loved one didn't belong to me, and I lived with that claim. I cultivated that very strong attachment, and now I realize they and us and me belong to him all along. And so this realization every time that only God has ultimate ownership about lives, and he has the right to take that life back, and it's not for me to question that. And we live in this world of causality and rationality. We want reasons. Why did this person have to leave so soon? Why did they have to go? But ultimately, it's coming to this place of acceptance, realizing this person, I was honored and humbled to be in their lives, that God entrusted this person to me, but they were owned by him. I have no ownership about this beautiful person. And it's painful, but this is the reality, for Muslims at least. And also to come to that place of acceptance and calm and say, she was all along yours. She was not mine. But I somehow, lived in that denial. And so every time when we say those Quranic passages, we are reminded, to God we belong, and to him is our return. Again, collectivity, that communal aspect, that we will all go, we will all leave. And there's also a comforting element in this, that I'm comforted by the fact that this is also my path. I will follow my loved one. I will join them. I'm not left here and stuck in my grief. And so that's also that comforting element that I personally draw. For me, it's a well of comfort. And I also think for many other Muslims. And so the Prophet would reiterate this fact when he would offer condolence visits to others. And also, he himself, he was somebody who experienced death, who had to witness the death of his own children, of his own 6 children, of his wife, like I said, of his beloved uncles, of his community members. But he would still say, indeed, to God alone belongs what he took, and to him alone belongs what he gave. And everything with him has an appointed time. Thus be patient and hope for God's reward. So the idea, patience is not an easy virtue to cultivate. It's really a spiritual exercise. This ability to endure, to withhold on dark and negative thoughts, is a very, very challenging thing to do. And I know very well from experience that it's very easy to slip into darkness and negativity and pessimism. But to restrain yourself, patience is a very active virtue. Like, you have to restrain yourself from going into negativity, from going into negative assumptions about God, or being angry or this and that. It takes energy. And that's why grief is such physically exhausting work. I mean, I've read books about grief that, it's such a small word, but it's huge in terms of how emotionally it can exhaust you. And it's described as somebody who for 8 hours in the hot sun, that's how it felt to me, for 8 hours in the hot sun is shoveling dry earth. This is how it feels physically. It's draining. It really tests you to the limits. It's physically exhausting to grieve, and to cultivate patience takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort, and it's a muscle. Like I said, hope is a muscle, and patience is tied with hope. And hope is mentioned here too. Fundamentally, Islam is about hope. And yes, there's uncertainty about when this time will come, but hope is also believing in this ultimate possibility and certainty that there is reunion, right? And there is light and life, and this is not the end. And so, patience and hope, the prophetic way of, living out your grief is also trying to have that in focus, which again is a very challenging, very difficult thing to cultivate, but it's possible. And he has promised that you can do it. You got this. And when you hold on to that light, that you're able to overcome that. I think that's also how I read the tradition. There's possibility, there's hope, and also promise that this pain is surmountable. It's not something that can crush you or destroy you, and you're not a victim. You're not a victim. You still have agency. What this says is you have agency. You have choices to make. You can decide which way to go, the way of darkness or the way of light and hope and life, or the way of self-destruction and pessimism. And it's not clear cut, of course. I don't want to say it's black and white. There's constant, during a day, you can find yourself in both of these modes and worlds, right? We are such complex beings, and I'm in awe of the complexity of human nature, but you see yourself drifting sometimes in those two modes. So it's a very challenging internal kind of exercise struggle. It's a turmoil often, right? And to find your way out of this. So community also means extending healthy death awareness into communities that are not Muslim. So the Muslims in Medina, there were Jewish tribes, for example, they were living together, and the Prophet would teach his followers that fundamentally it's the shared humanity that people need to focus on, that at this primordial covenant, this primordial gathering, all human souls were created and all these souls will return. So we see him, for example, getting up, standing up when a funeral procession is walking by. It's a Jewish member of the community, and the Prophet would stand up, show respect and reverence to the person, because he says he was a human soul, right? I share this fundamental humanity, the dignity of every human being, the sacredness of every human being, and transcending all these ethnic, national, religious boundaries. Fundamentally, the departure point is the same. Remember when I talked about the stages of human existence? Muslims affirm through the Quran that all souls were gathered in front of God and bear witness that he was their creator. And after this primordial gathering of all the human souls, the human beings were sent to earth to live up to that promise, which also is the idea that all human beings are born with an inclination towards faith, pure, sinless, and always with that inclination towards embracing the faith in the one creator. So community also includes to embody hands-on, literally, to be involved in preparing the deceased person, the brother or sister. And there's high reward in this, to be involved in the funeral prayers and washing the person, shrouding him. And I've read a little bit about how secular hospitals, would even invite family members to into the washing and preparing the person, because sometimes the loss is just, your brain needs time to process the loss. And especially if somebody you've lived always together, so close, they were always present in your life, And it takes time for you to integrate that loss and grief. And it helps to be in the presence of your loved one, the deceased loved one. Touch their face, touch their body, kiss them, understand that their body is, dead now, that their soul has left. And so all these, even the funeral washing, right, being involved in it has important therapeutic outcomes, and it softens the pain. It also integrates the pain in a way, in healthy ways. And I think for me, especially, I wanted to see Miriam. I asked that I wanted to see her, kiss her, hug her. I needed to understand that she was gone, and by touching her, really having the embodied experience, that helps a little bit to understand that, okay, this is really something that I need to face. My loved one has returned to their creator. And so being involved in these funeral rituals can be a very therapeutic, can be a very helpful way to process grief. It's not the only way, but one way to, because it's an embodied experience. And community members are encouraged to know the rituals well and to be involved and make an effort. Like I said yesterday, we received the announcement that this beloved sister has died. This morning at 10 a.m. Yesterday, I received the WhatsApp message that we need 6 volunteers to come and help with the funeral washing. And within 2 minutes, at least 15 sisters said, I'll be there tomorrow at 10. I mean, it's Thursday, right? But this understanding of, we need to show up. This is our sister or brother in faith. We need to take care of them, honor them, be there for them. And there's no material compensation for that. It's just, again, these type of encouragements, these sacred motivations to be in those spaces, right? And then to be part of funeral services is also reiterated, to not be just at the prayer, but to go to the burial ceremony, to be there and help with all of that. There's also the prophetic recommendation: take care of the bereaved family, to make food and bring them food. And this happens in the local community all the time. There's always support, people bringing, through meal trains, bringing homemade food. And even if you have your loved ones or relatives, sometimes you are so puzzled and shocked and paralyzed by your grief that you can't even cook a homemade food. And this is something that I see, of course, in a lot of religious communities, not just religious communities, but this understanding that the family needs support. And this was the narration about the grieving child who had lost his sparrow, and the prophet making an effort to enter his world and his emotional universe, allowing the little boy to share about his sparrow and sharing a little bit about his favorite pet, and allowing him to grieve. And this is public in the tradition, to encourage Muslims to engage with children who experience loss and death, to not dismiss them, to not neglect them. And like I said last week, child grief can be something that is often, dismissed as if children don't grieve, and they don't understand. And being in nature is also a way to integrate healthy death awareness. Seeing death and life played out in the creation also anchors the human being to realize death is part of life. There is a constant resurrection. Spring is coming back. God will return people to life after death, and that all living beings roaming the earth and winged birds soaring in the sky are communities like yourselves. So they are communities, all animals, all birds, all insects. The Quran calls them communities. And we have left nothing out of the record. Then to their Lord, they will be gathered all together. Now, what's also beautiful, Muslims believe in the resurrection of animals, and that also animals will be also in paradise, in the heavenly realm. and that animals are given great honor in the Quran, and that they're important in that divine scheme. So that quote spoke to me. I think it captures beautifully the idea that the Islamic tradition is aiming for, right? Physically, materially, death is destruction. There's no denying, we see that. But it's the idea that Islam wants people to cultivate that understanding of healthy death awareness, of human mortality, and to face it with bravery and courage, to make it part of their lives and not to deny it, not to distract themselves or try to escape it or be like abandon this idea, but be comfortable in talking about death in these circles of connection. So now it's time for our small group. Oh wow! So you'll have, let's say, 15 minutes, and then come back. So reflect a little bit about this embodied prophetic practice. Are there ways for us to cultivate more death awareness? What are some obstacles? How can they be overcome? And when you think of these circles, where do you think, where's our weakest circle? Where can we not talk comfortably about death? And where is it kind of more of a taboo topic? If you could maybe also reflect on that. But this is from last week where we didn't have time. So hopefully for 15 minutes, go in these small groups and then come back. Hopefully have a good discussion. All right, the Zoom magic worked. Welcome back. I see a lot of smiling faces, so I interpret it as, yay, we had such a good discussion, or yay, I'm out of the Zoom group. Just kidding, ignore. So given, the limited time we have, so I wanted to talk also a little bit about bereavement and grief in Islam, but I realized there's just not enough time. So there was a little video that I wanted to share, but you can watch it on your own. It's a very nice short video, 4 or 5 minutes, that gives you a nice profile about American Muslims and what are some of the issues that that are related to their experience. And it's very helpful, so I invite you to watch it. But I wanted to, since I already mentioned, I'm not a grief expert, I'm not a mental health professional. What I'm simply doing is, as a Muslim theologian, as a Muslim scholar, I look at my tradition as a devout practicing Muslim. And I take those teachings and the wisdom seriously. Islam is the essence through which I breathe and find guidance and illumination. And a lot of what I've presented really helped me in my own traumatic time, and I'm still, walking this painful path. But one of the things that really spoke to me was, and I call it sacred principles when we think about grief support and bereavement, is to get comfortable with and embrace this idea of lunar spirituality, that all of these very difficult experiences, traumatic experiences, are moments that can bring us closer to God, and that God is not absent from these traumatic periods in our life, or traumatic chapters in our life. And I wanted to share this holy narration with you, which is so beautiful. Again, a public document that is available for everyone. So it says, basically, it speaks to this idea of lunar spirituality, that God is the creator of the light and the dark, the pain and the pleasure, the sorrow and the joys, that God is in all of these experiences. And here you have a conversation between God and the human soul on the day of resurrection. It's very interesting. So God asks the human being, and remember that primordial gathering, that everybody will return to God. So God asks the human being on the day of resurrection, verily, God, the exalted and glorious, would say on the day of resurrection, O child of Adam, I was sick, but you did not visit me. He would say, Oh, my Lord, how could I visit you, whereas you are the Lord of the worlds? Thereupon he would say, God would say, Didn't you know that such and such servant of mine was sick, but you did not visit him? And were you not aware of this, that if you had visited him, you would have found me by him? O child of Adam, I asked food from you, but you did not feed me. He would say, My Lord, how could I feed you, whereas you are the Lord of the worlds? He said, Didn't you know that such and such servant of mine asked food from you, but you did not feed him? And were you not aware that if you had fed him, you would have found him by my side? The Lord would again say, O child of Adam, I asked drink from you, but you did not provide me. He would say, My Lord, how could I provide you, whereas you are the Lord of the worlds? Thereupon he would say, Such and such servant of mine asked you for a drink, but you did not provide him. And had you provided him drink, you would have found him near me. Now, what is so powerful about this hadith, or this holy narration, in which God talks and has a dialogue and questions the human being on the day of resurrection, is why the person, that human soul, did not seek nearness to God by being in the presence of those who are the most vulnerable. Now that is something that is mind-blowing, I think, because here we are introduced with a God who says, I am with the broken, I am with the vulnerable, I am with the hungry, I am with the sick, I am with the poor, I am with the grief-stricken, I am with the ones who experience suffering and struggle and hardship, adversity, trauma, but you were not present. And would you have made an effort to be present, you would have found me there. You would have found the other fellow human being also with me. Now, how do I read this when I approach this as a grieving person? I take this to mean that it's so important, it's a sacred responsibility to seek out, to be in the presence of those who are grieving, who are struggling, who are suffering, who are hungry, who are poor. And that God is present, is near with those who are broken, who are sad, who are going through major hardship and adversity. And what is so beautiful here, the encouragement is that you gain nearness to God through that person. By being in that space alone, there's nothing else here. It's just be there, be present, show up. And as you do that, you will find me there. So there is this idea that a holy encounter, a sacred moment, almost a divine revelation that you will experience when you get out of your discomfort and be comfortable in the discomfort, be in the presence, be in the dark with the person who feels being in the dark in that moment. I think this is huge because it encourages us as human beings to understand that you can have or cultivate more nearness to God when you make it a sacred priority to be with the ones who are struggling, who are suffering, who are grieving. And this is for me a sacred principle, to make it a sacred responsibility to be in those relationships. If I have somebody in my neighborhood, I now know how important it is to sit with somebody in their pain, to grieve with them, to shed tears, to hold their pain, to hug them, embrace them, to reach out, to make a sacred connection, because I know this person is a vessel through which I can also come closer to God. And actually, that person is so important in the sight of God. They are not abandoned or neglected. God will be with that person. God is with those who are grief-stricken, who are suffering, who are in pain. who are hungry, who are poor, who are facing injustice. And when I'm there, when I'm present, I encounter the sacred divine presence. I am too spiritually nourished. I gain access, I gain proximity to God. And this is powerful. And this means to embrace lunar spirituality, to be in a space which feels super uncomfortable, difficult, to be with those where I don't know what to say. I don't know what the right words are. I don't know what to do. And that's all right. You don't need to know, you just have to be there. And for me personally, this has become such a huge priority in my life to cultivate these sacred connections and relationships, to know that the most important being in this universe is the human being for God. And to be with them, to hold their hands, to embrace them, to cry with them, I have seen in my own life as the most powerful thing to do. When somebody just bears witness to your own pain, to your own suffering, but at the same time bears witness to their own helplessness, to their own vulnerability, to their own fragility, and understand we are in this together. And I don't have the right answers, and I don't have a solution. I can't fix your heartbreak, but I am here. And this goes two ways. I think here also the caregiver and the care receiver are both called to be in that space together. Sometimes the idea of I need to deal with my pain alone. I can't see anybody. I don't want to see anybody. I'm grieving privately. I'm suffering privately. Pain is very much privatized. Grief is very much privatized and isolated, and that just intensifies the pain. It intensifies loneliness. It leads even to more health issues. But here is the push for the caregiver and the care receiver to both understand that there is a sacred moment that they need to partake. The care receiver to be open to grieve publicly, to have their vulnerability seen publicly, to weep publicly, but the caregiver also to sit in that uncomfortable space, to be challenged, to question themselves and their priorities in life. And actually in the process, where they both are embracing lunar spirituality, like embracing that difficult moment, that hard moment, that tough moment, they are actually coming closer to each other and closer to God, because they both understand fundamentally their shared human nature. I am vulnerable, you are vulnerable. I don't know what to say, you don't know what to say. I feel helpless and hopeless, you feel help, but we are sitting here together and we are holding each other. And fundamentally, this is for me such an important principle in any type of human support, to say, I show up, I am fully present, I make time for you. And this is a challenge because we are pulled into different directions. We have busy schedules. 2 days ago, when I shared that essay of mine with my neighbor, she said, I just found out my cousin has cancer. She's 46-year old and she's been now in hospice care and she has 2 little children. And I'm devastated. I said, can you come and have tea with me? I'm home. Would you like to come? I just extended the invitation. I realized she wanted to connect. She shared. So when somebody shares, to say, I've heard this is heavy, and probably my pain gave her permission to share that. I also wanted to sit with her, and her presence gave me healing. My presence gave her strength. So it was that kind of mutuality that Islam wants to aim, that holistic, that relationship. And in that relationship, that both witness each other's true humanity and see each other raw and bare and full, in the pain and the joy, and in the tears and the smiles. So I think there's a lot in this narration, has inspired me in so many different ways. But the idea is that God is sitting with those who are broken. And when you miss out on that opportunity, it's a huge loss that there is some sacred presence, a sacred encounter. And to those who are interested in how God reveals himself, this is a moment that should not be missed, because there's some very intense, beautiful insights that can further character development in both of these people, because they both understand, they both take different wisdom and different lessons from this holy encounter. And so I think fundamentally, because in the beginning I was reminded by the comment of one participant who said that both Muslims, non-Muslims, we are both uncomfortable receiving help and giving help. We don't know what to say, what to do. We don't even know if we are comfortable receiving visitors. But what if we say, this is a huge encouragement that somebody, you know, our Creator pushes us to be in those uncomfortable spaces because there's some illumination, there's some possibility, there's growth, there's spiritual character development. And I think this is profound when we could just take this sacred principle and realize that it doesn't have to be always toxic positivity and pretending everything is great and everyone is doing great. Then this is really embracing our full humanity, but also coming closer to God. Oh, I also realize I'm already out of time. So these are these social connections that are so critical for grief support, to make sure that it really flows from the core, but also that the self is sustained through these connections, that all of these circles are needed. And in all of these circles, to make an effort to show up fully, and in you know, even in those uncomfortable spaces. And I think just this idea of the circle, the interwoven relationships of our lives, that it's this mutuality and relationality, that showing up for each other in these different circles is so important, right? Sometimes people are very much active out in the community, larger society, but they don't know how their neighbors feel, or they don't know what pain they are going through. People are very private about certain things. And so in Islam, the push is to have it public, like to see the full humanity of each other. So today I attended, the funeral service here in the local mosque. So, and I wanted to show you the announcements that I receive, almost twice a week. And you can see that it often starts with Quranic phrases that we've learned. To God, indeed, to God we do belong, and to Him is our return. So today was funeral of this sister, and very tragic. All her 3 children predeceased her. So she had 3 adult children that all died in her 30s before her. And so that was also something that I was struck by. And then you see the hadith are mentioned, and the Quran verses are mentioned, and everybody is invited. This happened today at 1:30, public announcement, and so many people came who are not related to this woman. So having open spaces to come and grieve, to be together, to embrace one another, to hug, to say, this is our shared journey. I think this is a beautiful thing to appreciate, that there are spaces where you can openly, publicly see each other fully and grieve, and also process your own pain. This is another one from the ISB in March. And so again, these are things that that are important. So I want to conclude here. I know we're out of time, but I wanted to share a little gift from Mariam with you, my sweet daughter, who actually was this inspiration for this class, and her return to her Creator that led me to think more about mortality and death, and the meaning of life, all these existential questions. And I haven't shared that with in the public, but that night of the accident in the car, again, we were driving to my friend 10 minutes from here. We were listening to the song in the car, which talks about paradise. It's a song that we often listen to, and that night we happened to also listen to the song. So Islam is about affirming life. It's a life-affirming religion. And this song is about that life will continue. And I think I take this as a message from Maryam, that she says to me, I am alive. I didn't go anywhere. I'm, physically might not be here, but spiritually, I'm more alive than ever. I exist and I continue to exist. And when we listen to that song, this is a song about Jannah, paradise. So I wanted to share this with you and conclude the class with you, because for me, it's a reminder that we were driving her to Jannah that night, that was her entrance into paradise. She asked what it will be like in Jannah, what it will be like in paradise. And my other daughter, she would say, we will eat cotton candies, clouds of cotton candy in paradise, and we will swim in oceans of chocolate. And so for me, this has always stayed with me from that night of the accident, a reminder for me, and always to be hopeful for that future. And life without the afterlife is incomplete for Muslims. Nothing makes sense. No suffering makes sense. No injustice makes sense. No pain makes sense. So life without the afterlife, without that life in paradise, is incomplete. And Muslims and non-Muslims both acknowledge that injustice, suffering, pain exists in the world, and this cannot stand. It has to be rectified, restored somehow, that justice. And that's for Muslims, that is how they take comfort, to see death as a gateway to that ultimate life of peace and absolute compassion and love, and returning to that. So I wanted to share this little music video that Maryam loved so much, and listen to that night before she returned to her creator, and then we can conclude.
Let's go to Jannah. Come on, it's gonna be great. Let's do good together to help us on our way. I heard that there's a river there, so beautiful and clean. Tastes of milk and honey, unlike the world has ever seen. I wonder what we'll find there. Do you think anyone will know? I wonder if it's sunny. I wonder if there's snow. Let's go to Jannah. Come on, it's gonna be great. Let's do good together to help us on our way. We will all feel great there, because there is no pain. We will live forever and never be sad again. We will love each other, there'll be no one there to blame. No matter what our color, no matter what our name. Let's go to Jannah. Come on, it's gonna be great. Let's do good together to help us on our way. This we have been promised, if we do our bit right here. Be the best that we can be, Allah will hold us dear. Let's go to Jannah. Come on, it's gonna be great. Let's do good together to help us on our way. Let's go to Jannah. Come on, it's gonna be great. Let's do good together to help us on our way. To help us on our way.
Of course, fully human. And I just want to thank you so much. This has been an incredible experience for me. I miss my girl every day, but I look forward to meeting her, and I know that she's waiting for me there. I just, I'm so grateful to be with you all, and um, maybe if you would like to share a few words, I know it's out of time, but everybody is free to go. But I hope I will see some of you next week on Wednesday. Um, but yeah, hope never dies. That keeps me going, and that certainty and conviction that it's been an incredible almost 2 years of spiritual growth and evolution and change, and I'm a testament to this. I think if I can do it, I think with God's grace, and I know that human nature is so beautiful. It has so much potential, and I'm in awe of that human nature, that we have it in us to overcome such deep pain. Um, and I remain hopeful. I savor my cup of coffee every day. I love life. I love living, and I cherish every moment. And this is incredible, meaningful work. Thank you so much.